Happy New Year and welcome to the first episode in 2019 to my channel, Adventures with Time. I'm Bob, your host. As you saw in my last episode, the state of my watch collection, 2018 was a great year. And now it's time to look forward and where I go in 2019. Essentially, what's on my radar for this coming year. I've learned what I like, what I don't like, and what I don't care about in watches. But I do concern myself with going overboard again. After all, there's always room for more watches. And more watches. And more watches. And more watches. And more watches. I want to welcome you to a new year of collecting. And here at Adventures with Time, I share with you my experiences as a new collector, and I still consider myself a new collector even after 15 months. But I want to thank you for watching my videos and encouraging me on this YouTube channel. In this episode, I'd like to review with you where I think I'm heading in my second year of watch collecting. And I need your help to figure out how to handle my watch collection. That is, last year, I think I went a bit overboard. I bought about 12 watches in my first 15 months of collecting. Probably too fast for a new collector. But I'm the type of person that when I get interested in something, I go all out. And when I look back, I don't think I've made too many mistakes. But again, watch my video on the state of my watch collection. I'll leave a link below. Even if I sell off a couple of watches from my collection, I'll still have 10 watches in my rotation. And my habit is to pick a watch on Monday morning and wear that watch all week to work, Monday through Friday. Maybe wear it on the weekend depending on my weekend activities. That means I'll rotate through all my wearable watches in about 2.5 months. Now what if I double that this year? That means watches won't get to see wrist time for about 5 months. And that's a bit long, I think. So here's my question for you. How do you cycle through your watches? Do you give all your watches sufficient wrist time? That's my conundrum and my fear of growing my collection too large. Although I may slow down in 2019, I'm not going to stop collecting by any means. So where do I take my collection this year? But before I get into that, I think it's fitting for me to share with you what I've come to determine I like and don't like in watch collecting. So here are my 5 likes and 3 dislikes in watches. Like number 1, interesting or stimulating dial features. Let's face it, the dial is the first thing that you or other people notice about a watch. So it's important to have an interesting and attractive dial. I can say that the 2 watches in my collection that have gotten the most attention by other people is my Stowa Classic Flieger and my new Melbourne Portsea with its triple date calendar complication. Dislike number 1, watches with non-time related features. But after seeing a lot of videos on G-Shocks, I decided to get one, and one with a lot of features. But after wearing that monster for a while, I decided it really doesn't fit into my collecting tastes. It's a great instrument, don't get me wrong, and I know there are a lot of people who like G-Shocks and form a whole collection around them. But it's just not for me, and I think I'll keep them out of my collection. Like number 2. Watches that are uncommon or unknown by the non-collector. This is one of those guiding principles that I laid down when I first started collecting. Many watches fall into this category. Certainly my Russian-made Vostok Komendantski. You don't see that around very much. Also my Ball Trainmaster 135th anniversary watch. Even though Ball has its foundation in U.S. history and in the great railroad industry, you don't see those watches very much on non-collectors. Dislike number 2, spring bars, especially those on well-fitting bracelets. Now I know they're a necessity, I don't hate them in themselves, but I have a very hard time getting those bracelets off, getting one end loose and then the other. I might even go for one of those spring bar tweezers where you can pinch both sides of the spring bar and pull the bracelet out. I'd like to know your thoughts on that and if you also have problems. Like number 3, accurate movement. You might ask, why do I care about the accuracy of the movement? After all, nobody sees me adjusting my watch. Here's the reason. As you heard before, I usually wear a watch for at least 5 days, the entire work week. And if a watch loses or gains 15 seconds a day, that means by the 4th or 5th day, I'm more than a minute out of sync. I realize a minute's not much, but it's just something that nags me. So I like a watch that loses or gains less than 10 seconds a day. Dislike number 3, poor quality control. Here again, my type A personality kicks in. Case in point is my Seiko Samurai. As you saw in my video on this watch, the first one sent to me had the applied hour markers misaligned, poorly misaligned. This really nagged me. Luckily, I was able to send it back and get a much better watch. Like number 4, NATO straps. When I first started collecting, I didn't even know what NATO straps were. And once I found out, I really couldn't figure out why someone would want them. But I finally got some and realized that NATO straps have a very nice form and function. And now I wear them on several of my dive watches, especially on my Squale 1521 TGV Lion Shark. I found one where the strap perfectly pairs with the dial colors. And like number 5, I can't leave out horology. That is, learning about watches, learning about different complications, different watchmakers, the history of watches, and how they work. I'm just starting out, and there's a lot more I have to learn. So there you have my likes and dislikes. But there are other things which some people really seem to enjoy that I just don't care about that much. For example, Lume. As you know, there are the so-called Lume junkies, those people who revel at great applications of Lume. I don't look at my watch a lot in the dark, hardly ever. So Lume isn't that important to me, although I do admire good Lume, and especially tritium tubes. But I must say I was a bit underwhelmed with the brightness of the tritium tubes on my ball watch. So I don't think I'll ever make a decision to buy or not buy a watch based on its Lume. Similarly is bezels, usually on dive or pilot watches. There are people who go into the details about bezel action, how well it clicks around as you turn it, the tightness of the bezel. Again, I don't use a bezel that much. I like them as a complication, so whether or not there's a little play in a bezel really doesn't impact me. Although I must say, going back to one of my pet peeves, quality, having the bezel aligned with the hour markers or any other indications of dial is very important to me. And finally, those boxes that watches come in. I'm talking about those presentation boxes. See the video that I did entirely on watch storage and these presentation boxes. They're nice to see when they first arrive, but let's face it, after you get the watch out, you usually store them away, keep them pristine, in case you ever want to sell the watch with the original box and papers. So with that as a background, let's take a look at where I think I'm headed in 2019. First up is I'm looking to see what it would take to refurbish that Tiffany watch I had. As you saw in my first video, this is a watch that I inherited from my great uncle. It's from the early 1920s and has several issues with it. Although it's a Patek watch inside, I think I'll take it down to my local Tiffany's, have them ship it off, and see what it would take to refurbish. I also want to see what the value is so I can weigh the pros and cons of getting it refurbished. Stay tuned because I'll make a video on that. I'm going to also look into selling off some watches that I'm not going to really put into my rotation. And as you can imagine, my G-Shock Golfmaster is probably the first one. I have never sold the watch and really don't know how to go about doing it. I guess eBay is the best venue, although I hear they charge a lot on watch sales. But the big question for me is what new watches and how many I want to acquire in 2019. Here are the watches on my radar in no particular order, and please provide your thoughts in the comments below. A Hamilton Field Watch. Now, if you saw any of my other videos, I've considered this before, and I was actually looking at the Khaki King Day-Date Auto. Of all the Hamilton khaki watches, I definitely like the positioning of the day and the date on this watch. But it's a fairly expensive watch. I think around $800 list price. So I may consider one of their field watches at the lower end, maybe even going to their manual wind watch. After all, it's got that classic field watch look. One of the watchmakers I've been keeping an eye on is JS Watch Company Reykjavik, a small watchmaker in Iceland. Here, master watchmaker Gilbert O. Gudjohnsen designs and assembles his watches, many with Icelandic themes. I'm hoping to take a vacation to Iceland soon, visit his watch shop, and pick out one that I'd like to have in my collection. Also, I'd like to get a motor car themed watch. Although many of my watches have features geared towards car racing, I don't really have a watch designed and styled as a motor car racing watch. I've really yet to investigate these. I saw some at the Worn and Wound wind-up show. So any advice you can give would be appreciated. And there's always new complications to get. One that I've been looking at is a moon phase watch. But I gotta find the right design and price point that fits my collection. Also on the list is investigating vintage watches. Up to now, all my watches have been current, new watches. I'd like to delve into vintage watches. Not vintage-inspired watches, but actual vintage watches. This is a big area and complex, and I've got to make sure they approach it right. Vintage watches can be tricky, as I'm told. So I've got to figure out the right way to approach this. What are good watches to get in vintage and what are bad watches? How to ensure you're getting a good deal and not being taken advantage of. There's a lot to learn here. So that's where my head is at here in early January. But who knows what other watches will grab my attention, and I'll decide to add one to my collection. Let me know your thoughts. After all, we are a collecting community. So stay tuned for some interesting episodes to come. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you'll be notified as soon as I post another issue. And as I always say, please add your thoughts and pointers in the comments below. They really help me out to make this a better channel for all of us. Happy New Year.